oh, that just reminds me of something else. Oh, there's so many things in this book that make me mad about the use of mental health. I don't think it was done intentionally, but that doesn't make it less damaging, and that doesn't make it okay. Hello again. I'm Jessie, the sleepy koala, because I'm Australian and I am sleepy. And this is part 2 of the Augustwrapup, which is basically me ranting about mental health in books, because I read a book that had very good mental health portrayal in it, and then I read an absolutely awful book that I think is detrimental to the mental health community and the way that mental health conditions are seen, and I think this book perpetuates all of the bad things that make the stigma in the community worse. The next book I read in August is Everyone in This Room Will Be Dead Someday by Emily R. Austen. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really nice, really quaint. It was really easy to listen to and was quite interesting. It's about a girl called Gilda who is gay and atheist and accidentally gets a job at the Catholic Church. She is approached by a nun one day with a flyer for mental health services and therapy. So she goes to the church to access said services and runs into the pastor. The pastor thinks that she's there for a job interview because they have an opening for a secretary admin assistant, because the previous one had just died. Gilda is an incredibly anxious person, so doesn't say anything and gets pulled into this interview, and she gets this job at a Catholic church where they presumably would not be very happy with the fact that she is a lesbian and atheist. But she doesn't know how to back out of it, so she goes along with it and goes to this job. She works as the receptionist, does a lot of very good work for the church of setting up a website and helping people who were regulars with problems. She also gets really involved via email with a friend of the former admin assistant. Her name is Grace, and the friend is Rosemary. Rosemary keeps emailing, not knowing that Grace is dead. Glinda, being an anxious wreck, doesn't know how to deal with this and doesn't know how to tell this old woman that her friend has died. So she keeps up this correspondence pretending to be Grace. There is also questions into how Grace died and whether there was foul play. So there's also that sort of mystery going on. It was really nice to have a book that was a bit slower and that didn't necessarily have too much to the plot and was more just looking at the interactions of everyday people and how people think and how people feel. We learn a lot about Glinda's mental health in this book. It is definitely intense. And if you are not someone who wants to know what it's like to be in the mind frame and the mindscape of someone who has intense anxiety, this book will be very hard. I relate to that. I deal with pretty bad anxiety quite a lot. And I really struggled to get through how difficult it was for Glinda in places. So if you'd prefer to not be in that mindscape, this is probably not the best book to read, but if you want to see someone who goes through something similar to you in a book, this is a very good book for that. I would put it up there with John Green's Turtlesallthewaydown, because that book is fantastic at looking at what living with OCD is like. It is detailed, it is in-depth, and it is felt, not heard. And this book is like that as well. There is no telling that really happens in this book of what it's like to live with mental illness. It is an entirely show book. You only get to see it. You're not told anything. So if you think that that's going to be too much for you, or that's just not up your alleyway and interest, that's fine. This is probably not the best book for you. I did have some problems with this book, and I did only give it 3 stars in the end, even though there was a lot of things that I liked about it. The problem, I think, was to do with the plot. In the end, I don't think it was resolved very well, and I don't particularly like how things played out over the story. I just thought the pacing was a bit wonky and could have maybe been stretched out in a bit of a different way to make things not feel as rushed as they did. I also really disliked the ending because there was a couple of different plot threads going, but I don't think that they were all sufficiently wrapped up. I think some were, and they were done very well, but I think that other ones weren't done as well or weren't done at all. So the plot is kind of this book's downfall, but at the same time, it was a really nice read. It was relaxing to read, despite everything I just said about mental health and seeing anxiety in the flesh. It was slowing down from what I normally read. It was just wonky in that slowing down. The last book that I read this month, and I don't really know why I finished this book or why I read it, because it was very bad, is Tellmelies by J.P. Pamer. This was an audiobook that I got ages ago because it was free. For some reason, I thought that there was a TV show or a movie that had been adapted from this book, and I had seen that online, and then I saw this on the Audible catalog, and I was like, wait, I recognize that. I'll choose that. And it was free, so I just downloaded it, and it sat in my Audible library for ages, and I finally decided to read it, and this, I shouldn't call a book trash. That's really mean. I don't have anything good to say about this book. I think this book is better off if it didn't exist. Like, I'm sure some people like it, but why? Out of all the mystery suspense thrillers you could buy, don't buy this one. Just ever. I thought this book was genuinely bad. Not just, like, subjectively bad, but there was some really bad issues with this book. In this book, we follow a psychologist called Margot. She's seeing all of these patients with very serious mental health diseases, because that's definitely the only people that psychologists ever see. Depression's not that common at all. We follow her through the story where her house gets set on fire by someone. She doesn't know who, and she starts suspecting her patients. And we follow it through until we find out who the bad guy is, who was incredibly obvious from the get-go. It was so obvious. We follow through until something dramatic happens, which I think actually happens in the prologue as well, but I literally don't remember. Then there's a final twist. Maybe not the worst thing I saw in this book, because there were some pretty atrocious things, but it was such a dumb twist that made no sense. It was just there for shock value, I guess. I really don't know. But the book was really awkwardly written. The pacing was not good. It was like someone had a jigsaw puzzle and they had the picture and they were just putting it together without actually taking any notice of whether the edges fit at all. So it was really clunky, and I thought that there was storylines throughout it that just didn't make sense. Like, why were they happening? Eventually it was drawn back in, but it was brought up in such a way that just begged the question of, why does this exist? Why are we doing this at all? It wasn't even a storyline that you would think, oh, this is coming back to the plot eventually, right? It just felt out of nowhere. It just felt like it shouldn't be there and was just put in for a reason. A question mark. It was put in for a question mark. If you're reading a thriller where presumably someone is a bad guy, you probably don't want to know who that person is from the get-go. That kind of ruins a lot of the twists, you would think, but it's super obvious who it is. It's not good. It's not good. This is also a book that has very dubious uses of psychology. Now, full disclosure, I am not a psychologist. I have some knowledge that I have picked up both through being someone with mental health issues, but also did a couple of courses at uni. But that does not make me an expert or anything. I am on the very low spectrum at the bottom of someone qualified to talk about mental health or like what it is to be a psychologist. You know who else is there? JP Pamar. And oh boy, do they talk about psychology and mental health really, really badly. I think the use of mental health in this book is naive and dubious at best and damaging at worst. The way that Pamar has done mental health here feels like armchair psychology. It's like they've done a basic Google search or just gone off background knowledge that they have and thought, that's okay, that is enough to write a psychologist as the main character in this book and who gives a bunch of mental health treatment and thoughts and is always thinking about mental health things. That's what it feels like. Like it does not seem like they have put any extra thought or research or talking to someone in the profession or having someone in the profession read over the manuscript. Like none of this seems to have happened. And I think it's very, very obvious reading this book that none of this has happened. For example, Margot jumps between diagnoses with people around her and with patients like she's the one who diagnoses them, which I know for a fact cannot be true because this book is set in Australia and hello, I'm Australian. And I know for a fact that you must be a doctor to diagnose patients. So firstly, what she's doing is not even legal. But secondly, it makes it seem like she has no fucking clue what any of these diagnoses actually are and how they might apply to a person if she's just bunny hopping between them. That is not good. That is not how a diagnosis should even work, which she doesn't know because she can't diagnose people, because that's not what she should be able to do. The next bit I want to talk about is more to do with mental health, but it does involve spoilers. So spoilers for now, and I will put a link in the description and also chapter bookmarks so you can jump to when the spoilers end, because there's at least a little bit more ranting to do after that. So the other thing that this author does in terms of mental health is makes the bad guys have very serious mental health problems. I think one of them has OCD, the other one's meant to have antisocial disorder, which is what people call psychopaths, but that's not what is clinically known as. This just sets the tone of linking serious mental health issues with being evil and the bad guy in a story. And that is not a good message to be putting out to people, particularly because the mental health issues that are brought up in this story have a lot of stigma around them still. This type of book that uses mental health as a prop in a way for a villain makes that stigma worse. Even if it's not intending to, that is going to put this idea in people's mind, even if it is just subconsciously, if they don't know much about these diseases, or they're already slightly worried about them because of media. It's like, oh, look at these people. They were evil, and they had OCD and antisocial disorder. So therefore, and that is not good. That should not be a central part of your book, unless you're just trying to undermine the mental health sector and the brilliant work it does. I'm furious just talking about this now. I was so angry about this. I don't think it was done intentionally, but that doesn't make it less damaging, and that doesn't make it okay. And this book goes to lengths to portray these more serious mental illnesses, because the clients that Margot sees only have these illnesses that are like schizophrenia, OCD, antisocial. I don't think bipolar comes up, but bipolar is in there. Depression, I think, is the most likely mental health reason that people would see a psychologist. Yet we see no one with depression at all. And that's not to say that depression isn't serious, because it is. It sucks. I know. Hey, remember how I started this video? And I think the way that this is set up, where it's not accurate at all in the types of people that you're most likely to see at a psychologist's office, it does give the impression that these more serious diseases are worse, or that depression isn't as bad, and depression is awful. These other diseases are awful. This is not meant to be a comparison between them, but it is one that gets made, and I think this book reinforces that, which I'm not okay with. I don't think that is okay, and I don't think it would have been that hard to have a patient that had depression or anxiety or something that wasn't an illness. And these are serious conditions. I just want to make that very clear. But again, it's not a comparison between them, and all of these conditions should be treated the way that they need to be treated, and people shouldn't feel like their illness is less because it's not considered a serious mental health condition. Just had to get that off my chest. Too long don't read. I think that this book is very harmful for mental health because it creates this divide by not acknowledging depression as a very common mental health thing that people would see a psychologist for. So therefore, I think it should have been in this book to be accurate, but also linking, the villains with mental health. I've remembered there's more. Story time continues. So it's not just that the villains are linked with mental health, but they're pretending to have mental health issues. She is a trained psychologist. What? How? How is she not able to pick up when someone is pretending to have a mental health issue that has really serious and severe and obvious symptoms in a lot of cases? She just doesn't notice. She don't notice. There's the fact that she doesn't notice. There's the fact that they were pretending to have these conditions so that the story could have them have mental health conditions so it could continue. There's also that. And on top of this, we get to the very end. And Margot's now in prison because she killed the bad guy. And there's a conversation with another character from earlier in the book, and the twist at the very end is maybe Margot had a mental health condition all along, was a sociopath all along. Which is infuriating. Not a good twist, by the way, at all. Just that, that is not a good twist. It is, again, kind of demonizing mental health in, she escaped the bad guy, but then kind of was the bad guy because she went to prison, and maybe that's because she was mentally ill. So, it's still got that running theme of demonizing mental health. And then secondly, she doesn't show any symptoms or signs of being someone who really doesn't have empathy. But throughout the book, she doesn't show any signs at all that she doesn't have empathy or doesn't care about killing people. I feel like this entire twist is meant to be based off of, I don't like when other psychologists try and psychoanalyze me, or something like that. She says something along those lines. Well, no shit, doctors do the same thing. No doctor likes to be a patient of someone else. This isn't foreshadowing for a mental health condition. This is just almost a statement of fact. It's hard to be the patient in a situation where you're normally the professional. That is not an easy thing to do. Yeah, no shit that you don't want other people to try and be a therapist for you. Yeah. Neat. That not good foreshadowing. But that also seems to be the only thing, except for one other background mystery that's going on of why she turns out to be mentally ill. She shows empathy. She cares for people. She doesn't have erratic behavior. Again, not a psychologist. These are just the things that came to mind when I was reading the ending of this book and then raging to my husband about it. She doesn't act in a way throughout the book that makes any sense with this ending. Except the one time that it seems to have happened. There's like this backstory going on with a former patient turned boyfriend, I think, that happened like 20 years ago. He is having a mental health crisis and the police get called. He only will talk to her. So the police call her in and she says, oh, can I have some space and time with him, and basically goads him into committing suicide. So, you know, there's also that in this book. That is meant to be the cinch of her being mentally ill at the end, except there's nothing else in the book that points that way at all. And it's just this one incident that is so out of character from everything else we've seen. It doesn't make any sense. The twist of what she does in the backstory in this book is only there to justify the twists that the author wants to put in at the end. There is definitely a place in books, in reading, to have awful situations like this that don't turn out well, that do explore what can happen in situations where someone doesn't have the other person's best interest at heart when that person really needs them. I imagine that there are books out there that have similar scenes that involve one person goading another into suicide. And I imagine that some of those books actually deal with this really well. Personally, if I was to read something where I knew something like this was going to happen, I would want it to be treated seriously. I would want it to actually really kind of matter and not just be this superficial thing almost that is there to have a plot twist at the end of a book where there is nothing else in the book that points towards it. To treat something this serious that way isn't good. It really feels like this should have been taken much more seriously and not just used as a plot point to move something along. There was so little about this scene and also this backstory that actually pointed out how serious this was, except presumably it involves suicide, so therefore it is serious. The book doesn't give anything to really show that, though, in the scene, because it does kind of come out of nowhere that she is the one who ultimately caused this man's death, and that only existed so we could have a character that suddenly has a complete change in her characterization. That really doesn't give any indication to the seriousness of something like this, and it feels like it trivialized it. So I will also add that, I guess, to the tally of issues with mental health that are in this book. I do imagine none of this was done purposely by the author, but I think that they really should have stopped to think about what they were saying in this book, even if it's not what they intended to say, because there is a lot of problems in here. The further I get from having read this book, the angrier I get for the way that it has treated people in the mental health community and the issues and damage that this book can cause simply by portraying characters and mental health in a certain way. This book has 1 star, but that's only because I can't give it any less. Initially, I actually gave this book 2 stars, and then I went back after a while, and after thinking about it and actually finishing it, because I hadn't quite finished it at the time, but thought that I pretty much knew what I wanted to say in my review. Yeah, I went back and gave it 1 star, and now if I could give it 0, I'd give it 0 stars. For this book to be redeemed, it would require probably completely rewriting it, and at that point, just write a different book and get rid of this one. That is the end of Jessie Rants about bad mental health usage in a single book. I'm sure there's more out there. I really don't want to touch another psychological thriller that involves psychologists for a while, because this has just really got into me. I'm sure there are really good books out there where it talks about the psychology and about mental health, but I don't want to have to wade through things. So if you have any suggestions for those types of books, like psychological thrillers, just thrillers in general that do involve some form of the mental health community, whether it be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or just looking at mental health in and of itself, please recommend it to me down below. I would really like recommendations because otherwise I don't think I'm gonna touch things for a while. And that is the end of my August wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed me ranting for a very long time about a single book, but also probably, hopefully, what I said about the other books. Let me know what you think of any of these books, what you like, what you don't like. Either way, like, comment, and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time!